In 1847, a homesteader's horse fell through solid ground into a chamber that hadn't seen daylight in centuries. Inside were things that made zero sense, because this underground shelter used techniques we didn't invent until the 1900s. So who really built these, and what were they hiding from? Let's get something straight. Winter on the Great Plains wasn't just cold. It was the kind of cold that killed you in your sleep. We're talking negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in minutes. Your lungs burn with every breath. And any above-ground shelter, basically a fancy coffin. Native Americans figured this out thousands of years before anyone else caught on. Here's the thing about Earth that most people forget. Dig down just a few feet, and the temperature barely changes. Summer, winter, doesn't matter. Underground stays between 50 and 60 degrees year-round. That's not warm exactly, but it's definitely not freeze-to-death cold either. My grandfather used to say the smartest people aren't the ones who fight nature. They're the ones who let nature do the work, and that's exactly what these builders did. But survival wasn't just about weather. Enemy raids happened, frequently. Some tribes built hidden underground chambers specifically to protect women, children, and elders while warriors fought above. A concealed pit house could mean the difference between your family surviving or not. Then there's the wildfire problem. Grasslands and forests burned regularly. Fire sweeps across open ground faster than a horse can run. But underground, fire passes right over you. The plateau tribes along the Columbia River had this figured out for over 4,000 years. That's not legend or guesswork. Archaeological digs in Washington state confirmed it. These people were living underground when the Egyptian pyramids were still fresh construction projects, and the insulation factor alone saved hundreds of hunting hours. The earth provided protection equivalent to several feet of animal hides. No tanning required. So they knew why to go underground. But where exactly should they dig? That decision changed everything. Location mattered more than most people realize. Pick the wrong spot, you're sleeping in a swimming pool by spring. Pick the right spot, dry floors for decades. Experienced builders looked for gentle slopes, not steep, not flat, just enough angle that water naturally drained away from where they planned to dig. My father always said water's lazy. It takes the easy path every single time. These builders counted on exactly that. South-facing hillsides got priority. Why? More winter sun, faster snowmelt, drier ground when it mattered most. Seems obvious now, but trial and error taught those lessons the hard way over centuries. Then there's the dirt itself. Not all soil cooperates. Sandy loam was the sweet spot. It held its shape when you carved walls, but didn't crack apart when dry like clay does. Pure sand collapses like a bad souffle. Heavy clay works fine until summer drought turns your walls into a jigsaw puzzle. The Mandan people along the Missouri River had a genius test. They dig small holes in promising locations and watch how water behaved over several days. If water drained quickly, good sign. If it pooled and sat there, keep looking. Here's where it gets tricky. You needed water nearby for drinking and cooking, but rivers flood every single year. So the rule was simple. Build at least 15 feet above the river's high water mark, close enough for convenience, far enough to avoid waking up underwater. And the weird part? The best indicator wasn't something you could measure. It was grass. Thick, healthy wild grass meant roots had reinforced that soil for generations. Nature basically left a sign saying, dig here. So they found their spot. But what did they actually dig with? That's where things get creative. No Home Depot, no metal shovels, no problem. These builders turned animal parts and tree branches into earth-moving machines. And honestly, some of these tools worked better than you'd expect. Start with the digging stick, just a hardwood branch, sharpened at one end, then slowly rotated over hot coals. The fire didn't burn the wood, it transformed it, drove out moisture, and made the fibers dense as bone. A properly hardened digging stick could punch through soil that would snap a green branch like a pretzel. My grandfather had a saying about tools. Fancy breaks, simple lasts. These people proved him right. But here's where it gets clever. Elk and bison shoulder blades became the world's first shovels. Flat, curved, naturally shaped like scoops. Hunters weren't just collecting meat, they were harvesting construction equipment. One shoulder blade could move 5 to 10 pounds of dirt per scoop. Multiply that by thousands of scoops, and you're talking serious excavation. Then there's antler picks. Roots and rocky soil laughed at wooden tools. Antler didn't care. The tines cracked through obstacles that stopped everything else. And here's a bonus. Antlers shed naturally every year. Free replacement parts, courtesy of the local deer population. What about moving all that dirt? Woven baskets. Workers filled them, passed them up human chains, dumped them at the surface. Repeat about 10,000 times. Tedious? Absolutely. Effective? You bet. Coastal tribes had clamshells. Sharp edges for smoothing walls and carving corners with precision wooden tools couldn't match. The entire toolkit for building an underground shelter weighed under 20 pounds. One person could carry everything needed to construct a home that lasted decades. Tools sorted. But actually cutting into the earth? That required a strategy nobody explains properly. Circle first, everything else second. Builders drove a center stake into the ground, tied a cord to it, and walked the perimeter. 15 to 40 feet across, depending on family size. That cord was their blueprint. Their architect, their guarantee that walls would curve evenly and distribute pressure without weak spots. Why circles? Because corners collapse. Round walls push against themselves, creating natural structural tension. Ancient engineers figured this out before geometry had a name. Now here's where most people get it wrong. They assume digging started at the edge and moved inward. Nope. Workers began dead center and spiraled outward like a cinnamon roll unrolling in reverse, standing on platforms of unexcavated earth that gradually lowered as they worked. Clever, right? 3 to 5 feet deep. That's the sweet spot. Shallow enough to avoid hitting water tables, deep enough that winter couldn't reach you. Go too deep and you're swimming by spring. Ask me how I know. I once dug a backyard pond that turned into an involuntary swimming pool every April. But here's the part nobody mentions. All that excavated dirt didn't disappear. Workers piled it in rings around the pit edge. Waste? Hardly. That ring became a windbreak, extra insulation, free walls without additional labor. The Hidatsa were especially smart about timing. They dug in spring when soil was moist and cooperative. Then they waited through summer while sun and wind baked those walls harder than pottery. One family dwelling required moving roughly 150 to 300 cubic feet of earth. 2 to 3 weeks of steady work. No machines, no shortcuts, just shoulder blades, baskets, and patience that would make a Buddhist monk jealous. Whole complete. But dirt walls alone won't hold a roof. A hole in the ground is just a grave without bones. The wooden skeleton changed everything. Builders set 4 to 8 main support posts into the pit floor, sinking them 2 to 3 feet deep. Why so deep? Because those posts would eventually hold thousands of pounds of earth on their shoulders. Shallow posts meant collapsed roofs. Collapsed roofs meant crushed families. Here's the clever bit. Each post had a forked top, not decorative, functional. Those forks cradled horizontal beams like a waiter balancing a tray. No nails, no screws, just gravity doing its job. Cottonwood dominated in plains regions. My uncle always said cottonwood was worthless firewood. Burns too fast. But for underground building, perfect. It resisted rot and insects better than most trees within walking distance. The Mandan knew this centuries before wood science became a thing. Now picture the rafters. They radiated outward from a central smoke hole like bicycle spokes, dozens of them creating a dome that distributed weight evenly across the entire structure. Push down anywhere, and the whole system pushed back. But here's what separates good builders from great ones: the lashing technique. Workers used wet rawhide strips to tie joints together. Sounds flimsy, right? Wrong. Rawhide shrinks roughly 15% as it dries. Those joints became tighter than anything rope could achieve. Tighter than nails. Almost welded. And that central smoke hole, it pulled double duty. Exit for smoke. Entrance for people. Some designs use notched log ladders dropping straight down through the opening. Visitors literally descended into your home. A properly built framework could handle heavy snow loads that would flatten a modern shed. No engineering degree required. But skeleton alone won't keep out rain. A bare frame is just an expensive way to collect rainwater. The layering changed everything. First went the willow branches. Workers wove them tight across those rafters, creating a mesh that looked almost like a giant basket turned upside down. My grandfather called this nature's chicken wire. Not pretty, but it held. Then came the grass. 6 to 8 inches of bundled grass, packed so thick a mouse couldn't squeeze through. But here's the thing most people miss. That grass wasn't just insulation. It wickeded moisture away from the living space below, channeling water sideways instead of letting it drip on your dinner. Now, the real magic. Builders mixed clay-heavy soil with wood ash, creating a paste they spread over everything. The ash? Natural insect repellent. Termites and beetles that would normally feast on organic material suddenly lost their appetite. Smart, right? The final earth layer reached 12 to 18 inches thick. And they didn't just dump it on and hope for the best. Workers walked on that roof for hours, days even, compacting it until it became harder than packed gravel. I've seen archaeological excavations where these roof sections survived centuries underground, still solid. Navajo families in the Southwest added pine pitch to vulnerable seams. During monsoon season, when rain fell sideways, their roofs stayed dry inside. Meanwhile, European settlers were constantly patching leaky cabins with whatever they could find. Here's what impressed me most. A properly layered roof lasted 15 to 20 years before needing major work. Most above-ground structures required annual repairs just to stay standing. But a weatherproof roof means nothing if people can't get inside safely. The entrance design? That's where things got really clever. A hole in the ground means nothing if everyone knows where it is. That's why entrance design separated the amateurs from the masters. Most tunnel entrances stretched 6 to 15 feet outward from the main chamber. And here's the clever bit. They sloped upward. Why does that matter? Cold air is heavy. It sinks. So when freezing winter air tried to creep inside, physics literally worked against it. The air had to climb uphill to reach the living space. Most gave up halfway through. My uncle used to say good design fights your battles while you sleep. These builders understood that concept thousands of years ago. Now, direction mattered too. Many tribes built entrances facing east. Morning sun would warm that passageway before anyone even woke up. Free heating. No effort required, but the walls needed protection. Tunnel collapses killed people, so builders lined them with flat stones or packed clay so hard you'd break a fingernail trying to scratch it. This also kept out gophers, badgers, and other creatures that loved digging into earthen walls. At the inner end, a high door or woven mat created something like an airlock, 2 barriers between you and the outside world. Warm air stayed trapped inside where it belonged. The Pawnee took security even further. They built entrances deliberately small, tiny actually. Anyone entering had to bend almost double, crawling through on hands and knees. Try swinging a weapon while hunched over like that. You can't. Visitors arrived vulnerable whether they wanted to or not. Brilliant defensive thinking disguised as architecture. And those tunnel floors? Generations of daily traffic wore flat rocks smoother than polished wood. But once you made it through that entrance, the real living began inside. So you've crawled through that tiny entrance, survived the defensive architecture, and finally made it inside. Now what? The fire pit sat dead center, always. But here's the thing. Builders dug it slightly below floor level, maybe 4 to 6 inches deeper than everything else. A raised stone ring surrounded it, and those stones weren't just decoration. They absorbed heat during the day and radiated it back at night like nature's storage heaters. My grandfather called this banking warmth for later. Smart man. Sleeping platforms lined the walls, raised about a foot off the ground. Cold air settles, remember? So sleeping elevated meant sleeping warmer. Plus, that space underneath, free storage, blankets, tools, whatever needed hiding, went under there. But the really clever part was what they dug into the floor itself. Storage pits, sometimes 6 or 7 of them scattered around the living area, each about 2 feet deep. Dried meat went in one, corn in another. Beans somewhere else. Underground temperature stayed constant, so food lasted months without spoiling. No refrigerator needed. The walls got attention too. Many families plastered them with clay mixed with dried grass fibers. This created smooth surfaces that bounced firelight around the room. One small fire could illuminate the entire space, and the ventilation, completely passive. Smoke rose through the central hole while fresh air crept in through that lower tunnel entrance. Hot air up, cool air in. No fans required. The building breathed on its own. Some families went further, carving small side chambers off the main room. Food storage stayed separate from living space. Less clutter, less smell, more room to actually live. These weren't primitive holes in the ground. They were organized homes. But homes need protection from more than just weather. Here's the thing about a shelter nobody can find. It's worth more than one built like a fortress. These builders understood something modern military engineers still study today. The best defense isn't thick walls, it's invisibility. Earth roofs got planted with native grasses within days of completion. One growing season later, that shelter looked like every other patch of ground for miles. Your enemy could literally stand on your roof and never know people lived beneath his feet. My uncle once walked past an old pit house site 3 times before an elder finally pointed it out. 3 times. And he knew what he was looking for. Entrance tunnels were the real giveaway, so builders got creative. They tucked them behind rock formations, built them into existing hillsides, positioned them where natural shadows fell during daylight hours. From 50 feet away, nothing but landscape. But what about smoke? That's the question everyone asks. The Nez Perce figured that one out centuries ago. They positioned emergency shelters in dense timber stands where rising smoke dispersed through tree canopy and disappeared. Clever, right? Even cleverer? Cooking at night. Smoke you can't see is smoke that doesn't exist. Fires got extinguished before dawn when those telltale columns would catch morning light. And the footprints leading to your hidden door? False trails. Families created paths leading everywhere except where they actually lived. Trackers following prints found themselves walking in circles through empty forest. During the 1877 Nez Perce War, Army scouts with maps and local guides repeatedly failed to locate traditional underground hiding spots. Professional trackers lost. These shelters kept families alive through generations of conflict, but even the best hidden shelter falls apart without regular upkeep. And that maintenance? It followed a very specific seasonal pattern. Now here's where most people mess up. They think building the shelter is the hard part. Nope. Keeping it standing? That's the real job. Spring meant one thing first: crawling across that roof, checking for animal burrows. One determined ground squirrel could turn your solid roof into Swiss cheese, and water follows those tunnels straight into your living room. Then there's the soot problem. Nobody talks about this. After a winter of fires burning daily, smoke residue coated every interior surface. Sounds harmless, right? Wrong. That buildup flakes off into your food, makes people sick, so families scraped walls clean every single year without fail. Fall brought the tamping ritual. Freeze-thaw cycles are brutal on earthen roofs. Water seeps into tiny cracks, freezes, expands. By spring, those tiny cracks become gaping holes. The fix was simple but tedious. Add thin soil layers, then walk on them, over and over. My back hurts just thinking about it. Support posts needed watching too. Wood eventually softens from ground contact. Smart families check posts by pushing hard against them. Any give meant replacement time. Waiting too long? Well, roofs don't hover. Fire pits demanded fresh clay lining annually. Old clay loses its heat-reflecting properties. Your fire burns the same amount of wood, but throws less warmth. Inefficient. Wasteful. Ancestors didn't tolerate waste. Here's what amazes me, though. Families who actually did this maintenance, they passed shelters down 3, sometimes 4 generations. Archaeologists have found sites showing 80-plus years of continuous occupation. 80 years from a hole in the ground and some wooden posts. These weren't temporary structures, they were legacies. And honestly, modern homeowners complaining about replacing their roof every 25 years should probably sit down.